Welcome back to the Almost Hour. As I told you in the last episode, this is going to be the continuation of the topic of yesterday, which I sort of facetiously titled Dr. Strangegod: How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Apocalypse. Yesterday's session, if you sat through it, was like a romp through my roughly first 40 years of life, hitting some of the high points of my journey. Kind of started slow, and now we're going to get into the acceleration years. So hang on to your seats. Okay, so where we left my story off last was I had taken a voluntary layoff. Spent a year studying acting and voiceover. And, it was really the first time in my life that I made a conscious decision to do something for myself. Something that made me happy, made me feel like I was following my passion at the time. Up to that point, my passions had been furtive. Things enjoyed in the odd moment when the family was asleep and I wasn't tired to death from my grinding corporate job. And that was probably the why at the time I was grossly overweight, depressed often, and acting began bringing me out of that shell. I've told you about some of the early shows that were part of changing my life. I didn't mention one that I really need to mention. At some point, I think it was like maybe my fourth theater production I was involved in. The first one, actually, that I was involved with, the Loveland Community Theater, which later changed their name to the Acting Company or something like that. At any rate, I was cast as one of the poker players in The Odd Couple, which, if you're familiar with, is a great Neil Simon play about two divorced guys who decide to become roommates in New York City. Very common thing that happens to folks in New York City because of the expense of apartments there. These two guys are as different as could be. Friends, but kind of more acquaintance friends who don't really get to know each other well until they have to live with each other. And the comedy of the show is these opposites living together and learning to not kill each other, basically. Finding love in differences, and that's kind of the theme of the show. If you've not seen it, I would highly recommend you get a chance to watch it or watch the movie. A great movie made about it by starring Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. Jack Lemmon's one of the best comedic actors I know of. At any rate, I was Vinny, which, if you watch the movie, he's like the mousy character that is always worried about getting home to his wife, is always worried about, he's totally consumed by family, and his poker outing is the only step aside from being the perfect family man that he makes. Kind of a funny, mousy character. At any rate, I was playing Vinny. And if you're familiar with the play, there are long periods where there's just the two leads on the stage. And then there's these scenes where they're playing poker with their buddies. And there's a few other scenes where they are having dates with this pair of sisters that they're trying to put the make on. At any rate, the interesting thing about this show was there's a lot of time backstage because of that, and quite a lot of time where it's actually both the poker guys and the two ladies backstage. And somehow I got to talking to one of these ladies and mentioning, my concerns about my health and my mental state, and she said, "You know what? I think you need to see this doctor that I have been seeing in Fort Collins." He's a naturopath, and he does this new technique to basically clear allergies. And I said, well, yeah, I've had a lot of environmental allergies. I've, been getting allergy shots forever. Every time I move, it's like new plants, trees, whatever. I'm learning. I said, oh, you don't want to be doing that. You should go to this guy. He'll fix you right up. Okay, so long story short, I went to see this naturopath in Fort Collins, who used this rather interesting technique, NAETS, I think. Natrum Baz something. It was all developed by an Indian fellow, and based on a combination of electromagnetic principles and spiritual principles. Basically, his thesis was that the body was weakened by the presence of contaminants coming from our modern processed manufactured world of foods and stuff like that, and pesticides and whatnot, and that those pollutants, even if we weren't getting them, were associated with things that they were always occurring around. So if you were consuming fruit or vegetables with pesticides on it, even if those didn't have pesticides, or the pesticides changed and they started using something that they realized was healthier, your body was already programmed to recognize these things as an irritant and would have an immune response. And the immune response can be not just your normal sneezy, watery, eye watery, and so forth allergy symptoms. It can actually be weakening your entire body. And so he put me through a series of tests, which was kind of strange. He would have me hold up my arm and put vials of some substance in my other hand and see if it became easier or harder for him to push my arm down. And yeah, sounds like voodoo, doesn't it? Well, it worked. There were some substances that I'd normally be able to hold my hand up against quite a bit of pressure, and all of a sudden he could be, just barely touch it, and I couldn't keep my arm up. It was really, well, I think it was one of the first things that opened me up to the possibility that there was more going on in the world than I had allowed into my, what at the time was a very scientific, materialistic mind. I don't know if I would have called myself an atheist at the time, but I would have called myself certainly an agnostic. And seeing this work kind of opened the first chink in that armor, I would say. At any rate, he found a few things that he said, this you're really, really allergic to. You just got to stop this stuff. There were things like milk products, beer, which I'd been a pretty avid fan of beer since I'd been living in Germany and getting access to a lot of great beer. Let's see. Sugar. Sugar was something I needed to eliminate insofar as possible from my diet. Okay, and then he said, in addition, for the first month, you need to go on an Asian vegetarian diet. Rice, preferably brown, vegetables, and very little meat. Maybe just a little bit of fish or chicken if you need for the protein. So I followed his advice. He also did some really strange stuff. He would kind of repeated the thing with the arm and the material, but then he would use an electrode to kind of reverse this sensitivity. And he said what that was doing is actually canceling out the sensitivity, the field that was being generated within my body that was harmful, by creating a counter field and kind of programming me the other way. So well, I think if you've ever worked with or are familiar with reverse conditioning, it's basically teaching the body not to, and I think conventional allergy shots are kind of like this. You give you inject some small amount of the thing that the person is allergic to, and gradually they develop some kind of a tolerance to it. Um, in this case, it's a little different though, because it's not so much developing a tolerance or as undoing the natural response, the automatic response to this stuff, which you're not really allergic to. It's not really bad. It's just that you associate it, your body associated it with, well, some pollutant that really was bad, and said, oh, I don't want any more of that. So I'm going to make you feel bad. I'm going to make you have an allergic reaction every time I come in contact with this. Now, interestingly enough, I didn't realize at the time, but this all very, very much ties into another of the core concepts that I teach, that everything has a soul, and the different parts of your body have sort of their own consciousness, their own natural responses, and those change. They get to have preferences, they get to have things they hate, and they will, to the extent that they are in control of your body and not you, override what you're able to do consciously with the combination of your most important organ, the brain, and the soul, which most people think that it's just the brain that does everything. They don't realize they have a soul. They don't realize that the brain is just a coprocessor for the soul, one of the main coprocessors, but not the only coprocessor. Anyway, this all fed into a later realization of how you would explain the fact of this technique working, and fits into the grand scheme of spirituality, of spiritual truth that I try to share with folks through this channel. At any rate, I went on this Asian vegetarian diet. Within the month that I was on it, I lost about 35 pounds. Not trying to eat less, just eating healthy and staying away from the things that the doctor had told me not to have. He still allowed me to have wine. He said, that seems to be okay for you. Just drink the drier wines that don't have so much sugar, because sugar is one of your problems. You don't want sweet wines. Okay, so first month, 35 pounds gone. Then I start eating normally again, but under the idea that there's some things that I shouldn't have anymore. So I stopped drinking beer. I stopped eating desserts and sweets. Ice cream went off the menu. Cheese was a rare thing to consume, and it was hard. I mean, especially things like cheese. I mean, a guy raised by a French mother who can't have cheese. Imagine that. But at any rate, within a year after doing this, I had lost a total of about 65 pounds, and down to approximately the weight I am now. And oddly enough, I've been able to maintain that ever since. And if you've ever had a weight problem and tried dieting, that's not an easy thing to do. And I have to tell you, it was easy. Because I became conscious of my diet. I became conscious of my weight. And, I'd go up 5 pounds, and I'd tell myself, you know what, you're sliding. You're falling back into bad habits. And I would clean up my act consciously. And so I've been able to maintain roughly a weight of about 165 pounds, plus or minus 10 pounds for a period of over 20 years since then. Big change in my life. Not only was the weight gone, but I had all this new energy. It was like I was born again. People who saw me before and after said, man, you look like you're 20 years younger. And literally, if you'd seen me during that time, you would have thought I was older at age 40 than I am now at age 62. That's how extreme it was. So I mean, it's not easy to find a good practitioner for this. This is something else that an early lesson that I keep teaching is that not everybody who claims to be practicing a certain art or science is sincere. Many of them just go over to the latest pop fad and they follow the motions of whatever it is, but they don't really have any sense of the art. And not only that, but they also don't approach it from the standpoint of, I'm not looking to replace one dependency with a dependency on coming to see me as your doctor. And this was definitely a piece of this guy's practice. He focused on making people well and having them stop coming to see him. He didn't want to see you regularly. He didn't want to, you need to come in like every 3 months for a checkup. Bullshit like that. No, he says, if you feel like you're getting to a point where you need a reset or something like that, and during the first few months, there were times like that where I felt like something was bugging me. I went in and, he found that, there's a couple of new sensitivities crept in. I'll just reset those real quick and get you down to a new baseline. So I saw the guy for about 6 months and then stopped going. And a few years later, I wanted to get like a refresher, and he'd moved on to Texas somewhere, and there wasn't any qualified practitioner of that there, and I kind of left that art behind. I don't know where that's gone. It's one of these things, kind of like regression hypnosis, that has initially developed kind of a pop cult, but when everybody jumped on it, there were times where, it's not working for this person, and it kind of became discredited. Or it became overused by people that were out to make money, and got discredited. So this is, another reason I think this was a key episode in my life. But at any rate, so here I am, 40 years old, feeling like I'm 20, and with a newly found passion for acting and singing, and I even tried dancing. Wasn't too good at it initially, but I gradually got to the point where, they didn't have to hide me off stage during a dance number. At any rate, then I had to face the fact that I was burning money, and I wasn't going to burn my savings to keep pursuing this. I was responsible for a family. So I realized I had to go back to work. Started looking for a job, and like I think I mentioned last time, I found a job in Boise, Idaho, back with Hewlett-Packard, working in a printer division. It was a really neat job to begin because I had a lot of experience. I was kind of stepping down several levels. I was working in a group that did sustaining engineering for the printers, fixed the bugs that people reported after the printer had been out in the field for a while. And it was kind of considered, like a second-rate job, if you will, compared to the folks that were designing the firmware for the new printers. We were kind of looked at as bottom feeders by the engineers on the forefront of development. But it was actually a perfect place for me because with my experience and whatnot, I was able to do the job very effectively without really giving it all that much effort, and being able to, because I had a very understanding boss in this Korean guy who loved the energy I brought to his group, and I kind of became his confidant because he was really struggling with some people issues in the group, people that he couldn't really manage because they were part of kind of a spiritual cabal within this location of HP, where most of the higher management at this site was Mormon, and kind of used their spiritual, religious contacts to take care of each other, which can be a good thing. There were a lot of really great people there in this organization who were there because of this management, who didn't take jobs in Silicon Valley, came to work in Boise because it was a better environment to raise a Mormon family. So I'm not knocking Mormonism, but I'm just saying that there's a dark side to religion too, and I saw that very well here, where some of the Mormon engineers use their relationships with these high managers to work around the system to get what they want. And one of the engineers of this Korean manager was like that. And he sort of was running the group from within it by working through the management chain and having people come down and sort of give orders to our boss. And if you've been a boss, one of the most unpleasant things you can have to deal with is an employee that's always going behind your back to get things that you won't give them. And that wouldn't have been so bad if the guy had been a good engineer, but he was actually the worst performer of the organization. You'd give him a defect to work on, and he'd turn what should have been maybe a 1 or 2 or 3 day task to debug and fix a defect into a 3-month project. At any rate, so I came into this group, and I through working with this manager, I'd had an opportunity to be a manager before, and for a while at Fairchild before they were purchased by Fujitsu. The plant I was at was purchased by Fujitsu. I was a test engineering manager. And I really didn't like it very much. I didn't like to be the one that had to beat on people that were not performing well. I didn't like to be the one that had to give comparative reviews. And I certainly didn't like being the one who had to lay off people, which at the time I left that job when they bought this plant, in the engineering groups, which is where I was at. They kept only a handful of people to help shut down the lines that were running there, and everybody else, about 80% of the site was told that they either had, like 3 months to go, and made them sign a contract to stay on, and they get a bonus if they stayed, or worse, were just let go in one day. It was the biggest layoff I've ever been around, and. Any rate, there's stories, and I could go on and on with stories that shaped my life, and at the time seemed like just random events, but later on I realized, wow, that was an important part of shaping my worldview and getting me to the point that I was ready for the spiritual awakening that was coming. So anyway, I was happy in this group. I was doing theater in Boise and living away from the family, because they had decided to spend the rest of the school year. My 2 older kids were teens and already in high school, and didn't want to move right away in the middle of a school year. So I was really enjoying life. I bought a more modest house that I thought, well, we can pay this off quickly, and then at some point I'll be able to retire and spend more time doing what I love, which at the time was acting and performing and stuff like that. At any rate, when the summer came close, I had another one of these anxiety attacks, like the one I mentioned around the decision to leave Princeton. And I think there was another one in there around this decision to leave Schlumberger too. Deciding, I don't think I'm going to be one of the ones laid off necessarily, but I really don't want to go back to the field. I think I'm going to jump on this strange opportunity that came up. At any rate, I hadn't started having another of these. At the time, I called them kind of anxiety attacks, where I just knew that things weren't going right. And I decided, what? I've got to tell my wife that the way we were living wasn't working. I mean, she didn't get in the way of my acting career or really dictate that much to me, but she did expect that, you know, uh, we would keep on with the fiction of having this happy marriage, which had no real love in it. We both loved our kids dearly, but we really didn't love each other. And I don't know. It's a very hard thing to spend 10 plus years sleeping with a person that you're married to, but you really don't love. No cuddling, no intimacy, uh, none of the rewards that you would hope to get out of a marriage. And this was part of my unhappiness with life at that time. And although I didn't have any love in it, I had this theater activity that I'd found new friends and at least a friendship love that I'd never felt before. It was during this time in Boise I met this wonderful guy who was also a tech guy. He'd started his own company making software for small law enforcement organizations because they didn't have the funds often to buy these fancy solutions that outfits like big cities and FBI and so forth would have to support their people. So he saw a niche there and designed a product and was actually pretty successful at it. And he was also into theater and an avid singer, and he became my best friend at the time, Brian. There was another life of Brian that was very influential. Who'd have thought? And life of Brian is also one of the things that keeps coming back to me as, I mean, so many references in Monty Python, so many things that tie back to something very, very personal that, make me have a very weird attachment to that. And I think that's essentially what I'm trying to give you with these sessions, is a sense of how you discover that you're really having a Messiah life. It's a matter of synchronicities, a matter of these weird connections that somehow all these disparate pieces of your life fit together into something that is such a strong pattern that it cannot possibly have been the matter of pure coincidence. Okay, well, about a year and a half into this job, which I really enjoyed and really enjoyed my life there after the divorce, what happened was, let me get back to my anxiety attacks. I decided that I had to call my wife and tell her that I couldn't go on living the way that we had. I told her, when you come and move with the kids, you can have the house here, but I think I need to live in a separate apartment and have this distance that I've grown to love between the life I had before and the life that I've been allowed to lead in Boise. And 2 weeks later, she divorced me. If I'd been a smart guy, I would have started the divorce proceedings in Idaho. Because Idaho is a state where basically you divide the property, assign child support and parenting, and don't award any alimony. In Colorado, she was awarded this huge alimony payment, $2,400 plus child support, plus insurance, health insurance. And basically it put me in a situation where I had so little money after the divorce that I was pretty much eating dollar banquet frozen dinners and ramen noodles for every meal, trying to make ends meet on a pretty high engineering salary that was just all going to my ex and my kids, especially after my daughter started college. And it was like this, I was still bleeding cash from what I had left of the half of my life savings, which is a pretty good sum because, like I said, I took the lessons from my Depression era father and was very frugal about managing money. I didn't spend on big expensive vacations very often. I didn't buy a lot of luxuries. My kids had pretty much what they needed, but I sometimes said no to what they wanted, unlike many of the upper middle class American parents of that time, because I made it a priority to save money against whatever might come in the future. And that kind of programming that was instilled by my father started being chipped away actually in this divorce, where half of everything that I'd worked so hard to save went to my ex. On top of huge payments going every month. I became very bitter and unhappy about that. And at some point, a couple months later, the company announced, well, we're going to move the monochrome part of our business to a new R&D center in China. Pardon me, I'm going to take a drink. One of the reasons this, I was talking when I introduced yesterday's session about feeling I needed to do this. I've basically been sick almost nonstop since, I think it must have been the Delta variant that I caught first in Indonesia. And since then, I've been sick pretty much every 2 or 3 weeks with some nondescript kind of cold flu thing that causes this cough, has kept me from singing as much as I like, and often gives me some serious headaches. So I decided, you know what, I may have long COVID or something like that, or some long-term impairment from this pandemic. And it could be that could result in a life-threatening situation. I better capture this for posterity. And I'd been avoiding talking about my personal life in my writing or my podcasting to this point. Anyway, that's why I'm sharing this in this session. Oh, very sorry. Maybe the gods don't want me to share anymore, but I'm going to keep on blazing through. So they were opening up this new R&D center in China. I didn't know much about China at the time. I knew, how it fit into our history, that it had been the location of some really nasty fighting in World War II. Was probably the country most affected by the strange disease that affected Japanese at the time and Germans. Militant nationalism, I don't know what you call it. But at any rate, I thought, I've been on the foreign assignments before in Germany, and I know they're generally pretty lucrative because they pay for your housing under the presumption that you might be retaining your housing on the other side and not be able to make enough from rent and so forth. At any rate, they give you cost of living adjustments. They pay for a couple of trips a year to go back to your home country and things like that. It's a pretty good deal. And I managed to make out very well from my assignments in Germany. I thought, well, if I take this thing in China again, I can probably live better than I live here on ramen noodles and banquet frozen dinners, and start rebuilding my savings for retirement. And on the flip side, I was looking at, there's probably no theater in China. I'll have to give up acting completely, but geez, this is the only way I can see financially to survive the next uh, at least few years, because my daughter had started college and was needing a lot of support. I'd already taken on some student loan debt to support her college. At any rate, so I volunteered to be one of the people that went to start this new R&D center in China, and was selected, oddly enough, because they decided one of the people they should send over should be an expert in doing the maintenance work on printer software, printer firmware. And because that was in addition to sending over the design and manufacturing of monochrome laser jets, they were also sending over the sustaining effort. So I became one of about 6 people that went from the U.S. to China for approximately 3-year assignment to help start up this R&D center. And when I got there, unlike most of the other engineers that were sent over who saw this as an opportunity to kind of become a little mafioso leader and dictate to everybody what they should do and run the show instead of being the one that's getting beat on to go do this, go do that, most of the guys set up their own little fiefdom and had their engineers that they were training constantly coming to them asking, what should I do, and coming to it for advice. Me, I approached from the standpoint that as soon as the faster I could get these guys trained up to think for themselves, to do for themselves, the more time I'll have to explore this new place. And especially when I realized that there were a lot of other expats there who had similar, people teaching English who had done theater in college. There were people there who teaching English who were doing indie film stuff on the side, and they liked the idea that you could work 20 hours a week teaching English and make enough money to be able to afford to live cheaply in China at the time. This is certainly not true anymore. At any rate, I got my little area of this organization to where it was pretty much on autopilot and didn't require much of my attention. I went there for the 8 hours a day and made sure everything was running smoothly, but had a lot of free time to kind of think and plan. And I got hooked up with a group that was looking to, kind of an artistic group that were making films together and would get together and do karaoke and just kind of an eclectic group of artist type people doing little projects and things like that. Well, I got involved in this group, and I suggested, we should do a play. We should do some theater. And everybody was like, wow, yeah, that would be really fun. I haven't done a play since I was in high school or whatever. And so we got organized around this idea. And I gave them the idea for a first show. We should do like not one entire play, because nobody knew if this organization, this theater effort, was going to get shut down by the police, was going to get raided, or it was certainly absolutely against Chinese law to do a performance without a license, without a script review by party member, etc., etc. So I said, instead of picking one work, let's do like a bunch of short comedy sketches. And I suggested that, we can build it around. I've got happen to have a book that had all the scripts of the Monty Python shows. We can do riffs on some of the famous Monty Python skits, which probably have never been seen or heard in China up to this point, and are drop down funny. Could be very much more funny if done, on a theater set instead of in front of a camera. And so we took a handful of Monty Python sketches and some short one-act comedies from other books that I or a few other people who were more of the nucleus of leadership of this group had, and put together a show called A Night of Mirth. And this was the genesis of the East-West Theater Company. We put this show on, and because we weren't sure if we'd get to do this and not get shut down by the police, it was very much a leap of faith. We decided, well, let's just do 2 performances. Let's just do 1 performance on a night, and see if we can get away with that, and then we'll know if we can do theater in Shanghai under the Communist Party. Well, we made leaflets advertising. We found a place to do it. It was like an independent Chinese theater that was operating in this big warehouse space, doing kind of avant-garde Chinese theater. And one of our people had a contact there, and we asked if we could use their space, and they were just wonderful. They said, "Oh, sure. We don't have anything going on on this night. You can use it for this night." And we just ask that you clean it up afterwards and leave it like you found it. And so we put on this Night of Mirth. We sold so many tickets to it that we decided in the last week that we needed to add a second performance. We did 2 performances in one night. Both of them were packed, standing room only. There was a huge demand for it, and it went off without a hitch. And so after that, we got together to start planning what happened next. And I said, we should probably organize this a little better, make it into a normal, functional theater company. We need, like a president, a treasurer, et cetera, et cetera. We made this formally into what became known as the East-West Theater. If you've ever lived in Shanghai during the years that they were operating, you've gotten to see a lot of theater that should never have gotten produced behind the Great Firewall. And I was elected as the first president of the East-West Theater, as I was kind of the most experienced person of this group and seemed to have the organizational skills to pull it off. So this was kind of weird for me because I'd been a person that had run from being an authority for all my life, and here I am, the president of a theater company. Long story short, during the time I was in Shanghai, we put on about 8 or 9 shows, and one of which was a show called Our Country's Good. Interesting play that doesn't get performed much outside of Britain or Australia, I think, but it's a story about a very Shakespearean show. It's about the first settlers of Australia, who, if you know anything about Australia's history, was settled as a penal colony. The Europeans felt that this vast land of Australia didn't have enough of worth to attract real colonists like they were sending to the U.S., Canada, other of their possessions, but could only be settled and trailblazed by convicts under kind of a forced labor. You make it work here, you die. And boatloads of convicts from England and Ireland, Scotland, were sent to Australia under the supervision of what were essentially jailers, the leadership of this colony. The story is based on a true story. It turns out one of these leaders had been an avid fan of theater in England, and had this brilliant idea of, well, we don't have much community spirit in this colony. We should put on a play as a way of sort of developing a sense of community among these convicts. And so the story is about putting on of the first play in Australia. And it's a really interesting play because it's a kind of a play within a play. You've got the characters living their life as either the leaders or the prisoners of this penal colony, as well as living their life of making this first play. And it's got this, sometimes you're front stage and sometimes you're backstage. You're seeing either what's going on behind the scenes or what's going on in the rehearsals and so forth. At any rate, in this play, everybody plays multiple characters, both male and female in some cases. And I was playing what was one of the largest roles, one of the lead roles, as one of the administrators of this colony, who was dealing with late-stage syphilis. Very dark role. And there was one other role that was like played multiple parts, none of them very big, but played both male and female. And we hadn't filled that role yet. And we always wanted to have at least one Chinese in the cast. So a few shows before, this young lady, Rachel Lee, had become involved with the company, volunteered to help, and her English skills were so good we made her our stage manager. And Jonathan, the director, said, "Hey, why don't we give Rachel a chance to do this?" The main part of that role, the biggest role, is as a female, and she might work out in that. And it turned out that this female role was my stage romance. Basically, this tortured romance between a prostitute and a guy that became her regular, I guess, who also had syphilis. Maybe caught from another prostitute or that prostitute. I don't know. That was kind of the way things were in those days. And because this role, most of the main scenes that she'd have to participate in were just the two of us dealing with a relationship, strange relationship in the face of a disease that, I don't know if you know much about syphilis, but it's a disease that gets progressively worse and worse and worse until it kills whoever has it. There were no cures at that time. They didn't have antibiotics, and it was pretty much a death sentence, a slow death sentence for people that got it. At any rate, Jonathan, the director, said, most of your scenes are together. I don't have time to teach Rachel how to act. You just have extra rehearsals on your scenes, and you put that together, and I'll just look at them once in a while and give you some direction on how you're doing. So I said, okay. So I started inviting Rachel over to my house to do rehearsals and direct the scenes that we were in. It was very frustrating at first because she was, like many Chinese, not willing to express much emotion, not wanting to give away her feelings, and I couldn't get her to do more than a mechanical delivery of lines. It was very frustrating. So I decided, let's break down this barrier. Let's see if we can get her a little tipsy and develop some chemistry or something that'll make this scene work. Long story short, we started a relationship through this. And I don't know if you could say it was the evil of me getting this poor girl drunk and proceeding to woo her, seduce her. But this is the woman that became my second wife. By the end of the show, we were definitely a couple. Nobody knew that we were. We were like holding hands backstage. And then when that show was over, the next show I was supposed to play Scrooge in Christmas Carol. And I decided, you know what, we've got to tell Jonathan about this relationship, or because we can't just keep hiding it from everybody. So the first rehearsal we go, and I pull Jonathan aside, and Rachel's again the stage manager. I tell him, you know what, we need to let you know that Rachel and I are in a relationship, and I hope that won't cause a problem for the show, but that's just the way it is. Jonathan kind of flipped out at that. Interesting guy, very influential guy in my life. Kind of like a demon character, Jonathan was. He was an incredibly brilliant actor and director, but a very tortured soul who pretty much had screwed everybody that ever became involved in the theater, because a very magnetic personality and kind of like force of nature male. He was much younger than I, and at the time in his like mid-20s, had professional acting training, had done big name stuff, and ended up in Shanghai because he had taken a job to do a commercial in Japan and hadn't been paid properly. So he decided, I'm going to stay in Asia and fight this legal battle to get what I deserve out of this commercial. Ended up in Shanghai as a cheap place to hang out and keep his legal battle going, and got involved in our theater company and sort of became the co-leader with me. I was the president, but he was kind of the director. And I absolutely loved that arrangement because I hadn't had much experience directing. I didn't feel like I could do that role as well as he. And my whole win for this theater company was making it be a successful outlet for people with artistic passions like me. If somebody was a better director than me, I was more than happy to let them direct the shows. And at any rate, so this was about 4 or 5 shows in, very successful shows. We'd had to move around to different venues after being told politely by the owners or police that you can't perform here anymore. We'd been told we could charge for tickets in advance. So we shifted over to a donation system, suggested donation, and gave people reserved seating if they would donate ahead of time. Not charging for tickets, mind you, but if you make your donation, we will reserve a seat for you. We found a way around every law that they tried to throw at us to keep performing. At this time, we were performing in a place that used to be a gym that was turned into an English school. It was in the basement floor of a big high-rise building in the Pudong side of Shanghai, and the building was owned by a typical mid-level Communist Party corrupt official who had this whole building that he had invested in, and he rented out the upper floors to businesses. It was a kind of a combination shopping center floors, and then higher floors were business and maybe even some apartments. I don't know. I never got up that high. But basically, the basement was his own private playground for his personal businesses, one of which was his personal whorehouse, and this other space that he had, I guess maybe one of his girlfriends had wanted to have a gym to work out in. That business didn't go, and the space was empty, and he let it out to somebody who wanted to make an English school. And I wish I remember this guy, but he was running this English school, and his special selling point was that he tried to have teachers that were real English speakers, foreigners, who would work with the kids and would teach them the vernacular language, teach them speaking proper English. And one of my friends who was involved in the East-West Theater was teaching at this school because he got along well with the guy, and the guy kind of let him. Kevin, got a shout out to you. A very interesting fellow I met in Shanghai. One of the many interesting people I met there. He was a permanent expat, very unhappy with the way things had gone in the U.S. and was living in China permanently, with this vision of teaching foreigners English through drama. He called it, at the time, I think he was calling his type of teaching movie magic. He would show clips of movies and then introduce the language along with not just the language as a language, but as a dramatic conveyance. So people would learn, because the problem with so many Asians who learn English is they don't learn how to use it dramatically. And that makes it very difficult for them to, even if their English is great, to work within Western organizations, because they can't be forceful in meetings. They can't express their opinions as strongly as others, and they tend to get walked on as a result by those who, this is something that ties together with my German experience. One of the things that I found very difficult in Germany is that Germans are very, very, very forceful in argument. When we were in an R&D meeting, literally engineers would be arguing almost at the top of their lungs with their manager and between each other, and like they were going to cut each other's throat. And then an hour later, they'd be out sharing a beer together and laughing and having a good time. This is a weird thing for me to see, raised in an American business culture, which is not that way. We're much more reserved and polite. Anyway, interesting tidbit. This exposure to different cultures was very important to my waking up and why I mention it. Okay, so long story short, I ended up meeting my second wife at about the same time we were kicking off this relationship. Jonathan became very unhappy that I'd started a relationship with his stage manager, and got so mad he kicked me out of the cast of the Christmas Carol, and and basically said, I'm taking over East-West Theater. I suffered my first coup. And after being floored by this guy who I had been I thought a father to, and given a chance to direct some great plays and really build his confidence as a director, he stabs me in the back. So I said, well, okay, if this is the way you're going to play. He was also planning to do the performance of the Christmas Carol in a communist government-owned theater space. So breaking the CCP's law, blatantly, openly performing in a state theater with money changing hands on the side. So, really totally integrated with the Chinese Communist Party corruption solution to this play. And I didn't feel comfortable with that. I said, look, I don't feel comfortable with Rachel being involved with this. And if I'm not going to be there, if the police come and raid or something, Chinese working on our projects are at a great risk. Us foreigners, probably the worst that could happen to us is we get deported. Think what could happen to Chinese who are involved, and if they'd ever decide to really crack down on us. And they really could, since we're working illegally, money under the table in a state theater now. So I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to let Rachel be involved in that. I'm, in fact, divorcing myself from this entire operation. And I put out a public letter resigning as president of the East-West Theater and saying, you have any problems from now on, go to Jonathan. I'm not involved. because I knew where this was leading. And it did lead there. Just an example of where things got. Uh, the second time I went to China, there was an offshoot company that had decided they wanted to put on the play M. Butterfly, which, if you don't know, it's kind of a retelling of the Madame Butterfly story, with the characters being, instead of a male American naval officer and a female geisha, concubine, getting married, it's now a relationship between two gays. And they cast Shanghai's most prominent gay actor, celebrity, in the lead role. Oh, we're going to make tons of money off of this. They put on one performance and then were shut down. The principal people who put it on were not deported, but they were told, if you ever put another play on stage in China, you will be deported. End of story. So this other startup company that had split off of my East-West theater because they thought they could do more, got immediately shut down, and a freeze went over the theater in China. And since that point, the only things that were ever put on were Shakespeare and Noel Coward and what's the other? Oscar Wilde. Things like that, very namby-pamby, very Western stories that would not be offensive to China. Self-censoring is something that I have very up-close and personal experience with. And, treading the line between what'll get you imprisoned or killed and what you can continue to do to fight back against tyranny, which absolutely, that government of the CCP is tyranny. And this is why I've spent so much energy politically, because I have seen tyranny in action. I have seen how it proceeds from, oh, go ahead and do whatever you want, that's why so many people come back from China and say, oh, we have more freedom there than we had in the US or in Europe or blah, blah, blah. Yeah, because China's set up so you can literally get away with anything. They gather information on everybody. They've got something on you, and if they ever want to deport you, if they ever want to put you in jail, they've got the goods on everybody, because you can't possibly function in China without breaking laws. This is how a totalitarian dictatorship works. This is how evil gods, the dark gods, work. They let you make all kinds of mistakes. They even enable it, encourage it, and give you the power to do these dark things, not realizing what you're going to pay in the long run. Again, this all ties back into my whole story. At any rate, after this incident, my father's health was failing, and I got a call, said, you better get back here. I think he's going to be gone soon. So I'd already been planning to go back as my assignment was over, and I had to make a decision about this new relationship. Do I continue it and move towards marriage or not? We'd originally planned to get a fiancé visa, have her come to the U.S. and continue our relationship, which is only about 3 months old at this point, and eventually get married. We applied for that, had all the stuff set up, we're ready to travel, and the U.S. government misprocessed our application. They didn't know their own new rules about how to do immigration, because they were making all kinds of changes at this time to stop terrorism. Okay, long story short, they rejected our application, even though everything was done completely in order. And I said, well, okay, can you just after checking into it, can you just proceed with it now that you know it is really right and legit? No, you have to resubmit it and get back in line. So we decided to get married in China, and this was a tough decision for me because I didn't know this gal that well, and at any rate, it had very big consequences in the rest of my life. We got married, moved back to Boise, and within a week after that, my father died. I never actually saw him conscious again, but I was the first child there when they decided, he was in the hospital for the nth time, and the doctor said, you know what, he's in a coma now. I don't think we're going to be able to ever pull him out of it. I think it might be best if you just take him home and out of all this horrible environment of junk and just let him die naturally in his bed. So that's what we did. He spent his last night in bed with his beloved wife and his son holding his hand. A hugely influential experience for me, a very spiritual experience, because I could feel his soul's energy trying to get out, knowing that, hey, I'm still in here, but I can't get out through this interface of my body anymore. Any rate, I think that's an important thing to have covered here. Going on, I think I don't want to talk much about the next phase of things going on because it brings up a lot of unhappy memories of a marriage gone wrong. Let me jump fast forward to 2018, or the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. At this point, she was now calling herself Leanne Trump at the time. I'd been supporting her career, thinking that, well, if her career takes off, she wants to have a baby at some point, I can be the stay-at-home dad and maybe still find time to do theater and stuff. And maybe I can get to a retirement point a little early, because where I was at that point was taking project manager jobs, which I was good at, but I really hated that, having to push people to get things done and kind of being the center of everything, having to be the one that turns all the gears and makes the sausage. It was extremely stressful for me, and it was causing me to go into a very dark place that I didn't want to go again. So we got to the point where we'd had this child, and her career was really on the move. She'd taken she'd gotten a degree, a master's in HR, and had gotten in one of these leadership training programs with a big multinational corporation, and had gotten a chance to move around, as they like to do for these management training things, to several different jobs to build skills of a wide variety of skills that could be used in management. And this had forced me to stop working for bigger companies and just take like whatever job I could find wherever she happened to need to be for her work. We hadn't had the child yet. When we got to the point where she was done with this rotation thing, she wanted to buy a house and settle down and have a kid. Now, mind you, this wasn't an easy thing for us, because I had gotten a vasectomy a couple of years after my son Oliver was born, the second child of the first marriage. I'd been sterile for 25 years. Now, if you know anything about reversing vasectomies, you know that the success rate is very low and gets much lower with time. So I didn't have a high hope that I could get this reversal, but I promised my wife I'd give it the college try. I found the cheapest vasectomy I could get was from Oklahoma, very born-again Christian that kind of had the idea that be fruitful and multiply was a really good thing, and wanted to help people have children who were not able to have children, and offered very inexpensive vasectomy reversals. I went to Oklahoma, got reversed. The trip back was one of the most horrible experiences of my life, because I didn't realize that the reversal process was going to be much more difficult than getting the vasectomy in the first place. And connecting through Chicago a day and a half after having a reverse vasectomy is a really bad idea. I barely survived to get home. Anyway, cut forward, and at first we thought the reversal hadn't worked, and we kind of had given up on the idea of having a child. And in a way, I thought maybe that's kind of good, because this wife of mine is very ambitious, very money-centered, and I don't think that she would be very successful as a mom. And in fact, the only reason I'd agreed to get the reversal was with the promise that, okay, once we've got a kid, somebody's got to stay home with it. And your career's just taking off. Mine is in the dumps, because we've been prioritizing, your ambitions. I think I should get to stay home with my daughter. I'm only about 5 years away from retirement, early retirement, getting my Social Security. And I believe very strongly that a child needs a parent at home to take care of things. And yeah, you could bring your mother over from China, but she speaks not a word of English. She is absolutely incapable of functioning in this society. And she's got her own problems. You guys don't get along well together. I don't think that's going to work as a long-term solution. So she finally agreed that I would be the stay-at-home parent. Long story short, we eventually had that child, surprisingly enough. And I became a stay-at-home parent. We eventually wound up living back in the New York area, because she wanted to raise our daughter Eloise in this big city environment of New York, where she had access to so many wonderful opportunities and blah, blah, blah. So she ended up taking a job that required her to travel a lot, which was fine with me, because by this time we were fighting a lot when we were together, and it's like, spend time away. I'll take care of the baby, and we won't be exposing the baby to all this dark stuff. Living in the New York City area, being a stay-at-home dad, and once in a while getting to enjoy some acting, I started getting, day parts and stuff like that, where, okay, is it possible that we could, at this time her grandmother was visiting from China, so it wasn't such a big deal if I took off a little time to go act, and I actually sort of became a professional actor in New York. Started getting quite a bit of work, in fact. Not big name work, but, getting a sense that, well, I could legitimately call this a career, and it was more or less working okay. Then it came a very interesting day. It was a Friday, and let's see, it was actually our anniversary, 11th anniversary, and I'd gotten a call to do a commercial. Pretty good job. Commercial work it was a local commercial, but it paid pretty well, and it looked like it was going to be fun. It was kind of a comic commercial for, what was it for? Any rate, I had this commercial, and so I said, well, can I go do this? It's pretty good money. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, we can go do something for our anniversary tonight when I get back, okay? Yeah, fine. So I go to this commercial, And it started out as the most wonderful thing. The crew and the cast were just, you know, having fun, all excited about doing this comic commercial. The problem was that the main character of the commercial was who was delivering a lot of, it was for some kind of insurance. That's what it was. It was kind of, the commercial was kind of a takeoff on the Leave It to Beaver. You know, this perfect family who's sitting at the family dinner table discussing something, and it turns out the kid is the wise one. Well, the poor kid, had tried to memorize his lines, but then they were changing them as they were going, and the thing just turned into a total hooch screw. And in trying to be helpful, I maybe spoke up a little bit too much when they were discussing how this thing was going and how to get this scene done, get the kids' lines out the way that people wanted it. Long story short, I got kicked off that set. The director just got mad at me and said, "You know what? We don't need you." Now, it may have just been because I was sitting in the scene. I was sitting at a table reading the paper and occasionally saying something. And maybe he decided it would be easier if the only footage they had of me was with the paper in front of me and just the lines coming out, which they'd already gotten audio for. I don't know, but it was really a hard knock to be just abruptly kicked off the set and told you can go home. Not explain any reason or anything, just thanks, we're done with you. They did pay me, but it felt like I was just being hustled out of this set, and it was really a dark feeling for an actor. The only thing worse than not getting a part that you think you auditioned well for is getting kicked off of a set of a part you already been cast for, right? So I was really downhearted, dejected, but I called my wife of the time and said, well, at least I'm getting home earlier than I thought I would, because I thought we wouldn't be able to do more than enjoy a late supper or something, or maybe even have to postpone our anniversary celebration till the weekend. I get home and expecting that I can tell a little bit of this story to my wife and get a little sympathy, and she blows up. I say, well, okay, I'll stop talking about it. Let's go now. Let's just have a nice dinner somewhere, a nice meal somewhere, and try to enjoy this anniversary, because we had planned, grandma can watch the baby, blah, blah, blah. So we go out to a restaurant across the street from the apartment. We were living in Norwalk and Connecticut. And during our anniversary celebration, she tells me she wants a divorce. I was devastated, completely devastated, because although we'd had a lot of problems in our relationship, it had been okay, and we had a child, a wonderful child together. And I was raised in an era where you made things work. That's why I didn't divorce my first wife. She divorced me. And here we go, again being divorced, and this time by a woman that I really was in love with. I thought we had a good marriage. I was devastated. And over the next week was near to committing suicide, which is actually had happened again earlier. I need to back up a little bit and tell you about an incident during this second marriage where my second wife wanted to move back to China. My first wife got wind of it and was afraid she was going to lose her big alimony payment and so forth, and got me put on the no-fly list. So I have had direct personal experience with the insanity of the Patriot Act. I was on the no-fly list not because I'd committed any crime, not because I was even suspected of any crime, but because they got a lawyer to claim, well, we can't let him out of the country because he might not pay his bills, might not pay his alimony. Yeah, you can get put on the no-fly list for that. I went anyway because I'd already lined up. I'd been asked to play Scrooge in A Christmas Carol by the latest management of the East West Theater, who'd taken over after Jonathan moved elsewhere. And it was like, oh, this is vindication. It's like karma coming back and rewarding me for this horrible experience I went through. So my second wife moved back to China. I was going to be going with her. The day before we were to fly, we'd already arranged to move our stuff, put some in storage, and start the process of selling the house we had there, which I'd gotten in the first divorce. Or no, it was a house I bought after I got back from China. Okay, anyway. The day before we were supposed to move, I got served and told that, oh, you cannot fly. You're on the no-fly list. You need to be appearing in this proceeding to discuss this issue, such and such a date, blah, blah, blah. Very draconian bullshit, considering that they expected me to just drop everything and go to Colorado for this hearing on a crime I'd never committed. And it put me on the no-fly list to make sure I would be there and could not move to China. I said, you can't do this to somebody. I'm going to go anyway. So I figured out a way to fly out of Vancouver. And I flew to Seattle, went over the border on a bus, and flew out of Vancouver and managed to get out without my passport being checked till it got into a country where they weren't going to be checking the no-fly list. It was an American thing at that point. I got to China, and everything seemed to be okay. I did the play, started looking for work as a science or English teacher, and actually had lined up a job. Kind of a fake job. What you do if you want to work as a freelancer in China is you find somebody that's willing to sponsor a work visa for you. And then, you pay them for helping you get a work visa and maybe do some work for them, but then you have your time free to be a freelancer. And that was how I thought I was going to somehow make ends meet. And while I was still trying to look for corporate jobs because I knew I needed more money than that to pay my ex and get past all this legal crap that was going on. So I get my sponsors lined up with a work visa, and I realize I have no pay. I go to Hong Kong to get the work visa stamp in my passport. I realize that I don't have any free space in my passport. I need to get more pages. So I go to the U.S. Embassy. They confiscate my passport, pull me into an interrogation room, and proceed to treat me like a terrorist because he's on the no-fly list. They interrogate me for about an hour and then say, okay, we're going to hang on to your passport. You're free to go. We'll let you know what we're going to decide to do with you. I spent 3 weeks in Hong Kong without a passport, not knowing if I was going to get to be able to rejoin my wife in China, or what. Living in this little hostel place, because I was trying to save money at the time because we were embroiled in this legal insanity, started by my first ex. At any rate, at some point in this time, I very nearly committed suicide. If you've been to Hong Kong, you know they have a very good metro system. There came a point, I don't remember exactly when, but I just thought, you know what? It's like every time anything good is happening in my life, something comes and shits on me like this, and I don't know how much more of it I can take. Maybe I ought to just end this life. And I was standing waiting for a train and thought, you know what? it would be just so easy to jump in front of this. And I tell you, I was literally this close to jumping in front of a train. I don't know why I made the decision to hold back. But I absolutely understand what people are going through in these moments of existential choice. This was one of them, and going back to where I was at in the story, this came another one. I didn't know if I could take any more after being dumped by a second wife who I had done everything I could do to make happy in this country. I'd followed her to every job she wanted to take. I'd lost jobs that were actually pretty good so she could move to what she wanted to do. We bought a house that turned out to be a really bad buy, because after we bought that house, she decided she hated her job and wanted to leave and take another one. I'd really been through a lot for this woman and had to give up a lot of my own passions and whatnot. I didn't get to act very much. Oddly, though she became involved through the theater company I started, she had absolutely no interest in my passion. It was like the greatest imposition to even ask her to come and watch one performance of a show I was in. And she'd sit in the back playing with her phone. Now, I understand maybe English isn't her first language, but not even caring enough to pay attention to my performance was really hurtful to me. All this, I loved the woman dearly. I was devastated. I was near suicide, and I'd been through it before, so I knew that, well, this is not a good place to be. Now, the year before, my ex, the second wife, had planned a trip for us to Ecuador with our child, Eloise. When we were looking at Ecuador, I thought, well, I'd like to see what there is to see that I would be interested in doing there. And I noticed that this was a place where they did ayahuasca ceremonies. And I thought, you know what, that would be an interesting thing to do sometime, because I've had such a weird life full of all of these ups and downs and strange feelings hitting me that I had to do something different. I had to go this way. It's like somebody's sending me a lot of messages here. Maybe that's going to help me understand it. I wanted to go to an ayahuasca ceremony when we visited Ecuador, but my ex had planned, second wife had planned so much for us that there was no way to get the time off to do a 2-day retreat. So it fell on the back burner. But when I was in this state of thinking about suicide again, I thought, you know what? I had been thinking about this ayahuasca stuff. I wonder if maybe this is the time to do it. So I started looking and seeing, well, with the divorce coming up and everything going on, is there any way I could do this on cheap? And I discovered, oh, there is one of these ayahuasca ceremony outfits that actually does ceremonies in the United States. And oh my God, they've got a ceremony coming up, literally in 3 weeks, in Connecticut, less than 10 miles away from where we were living. Interesting coincidence. I called them up and I said, can I get into this? And they said, well, yesterday the answer would have been no, but today we had a couple of people drop out. So yes, we'll sign you up. And I went to an ayahuasca ceremony. I'd never done any kind of a drug before. I think I'd smoked a couple of joints up to this point and found marijuana didn't do anything for me. Red wine was my thing. And it was kind of taking a big leap of faith to go try this stuff. But, you know, I'd been getting interested in spirituality and in a lot of the discussions about what was going on now, politically and sort of with the whole consciousness of the species. And this was one of the things that I'd started following, watching YouTube while being a stay-at-home parent. Uh, Stay-at-home parents have some free time while their kids are playing, and I used it to watch YouTube and learn about spirituality and alternate theories of history. I'd become aware of the work of folks like Graham Hancock and so forth. Okay, so I go to this ayahuasca ceremony, follow all the rules about changing diet. It was difficult for me to stop drinking wine for a week leading up to it, but I did that. And, I knew that it worked. You needed to come in with some sort of intentions. Well, obviously, I wanted to know what to do with this failing marriage, where to go with my future. And also, it was like, gosh, maybe I am drinking too much wine. Maybe alcohol is a problem for me, even though I didn't think it was bad for me. I really didn't. And I'd stop for, I'd just not drink for 2 months at a time and be perfectly okay. Oh, I lost my view of myself for a second. So, I did not display any of the behavior of a typical alcoholic. I could take it or leave it, but I actually just enjoyed it. And it helped me cope with the stress of having a wife that had a horrible temper, would blow up over the slightest little thing, and to a large extent, when she was it was a kind of bipolar person. She was either the sweetest person in the world or, a demon from hell. And she'd gotten worse since we had the child, not better, which was exactly the opposite of what I thought would happen. At any rate, so I wanted to know, hey, what's up with this deal with alcohol? Those were my two intentions going into this ayahuasca session. And the experience I had was not what I expected. And this is what I really need to tell you. This was my great awakening. The first night of this ceremony, if you've never done this is kind of how it works. They find a space with a big room that's big enough to lay down some mats so people could either, sit up or sleep through the process. And this particular outfit started out with sharing hape, which is a snuff tobacco made from original tobacco plants, not the ones that have been hybridized to please the cigarette industry. So tobacco in the old country, in South America, is used as a spiritual stimulant. And this particular outfit thought it was good to have that first to kind of open your mind, to make your mind very clear, to give the ayahuasca more of a chance to work on you. And then later on, they administer the ayahuasca, 1 dose. And then after about an hour, they said, anybody who feels like they need a second dose, come on up and get another one. Well, I wasn't going anywhere with this after an hour. I thought, well, maybe this just doesn't work for me. I'll go take another drink. I took another glass of this very sickly sweet brew, I would call it. Worse than any cough medicine you've ever encountered. And shortly thereafter, the few little lights in the room, there was like a smoke detector that had a little green light, and there were a few other lights. It was mostly very dark, but there were some green and red and blue little lights on various appliances or computers or whatever in the room. These lights, the light out of them started atomizing, quantizing. I could see every photon coming out of these lights. Weird. And then the lights coming from these sources started moving and converging and assembling themselves into what I can only describe as a light pterodactyl. a dinosaur, flying dinosaur of light that came to me and started operating on me in a very business-like fashion. Did its thing and sort of disappeared. And then shortly after, I began feeling breasts growing, feeling that I am shape-shifting into an animal, some kind of a bear or something like that. It's like, wow, this is weird. And the next thing I know, there's this regal figure before me that I would describe as the emperor of the tall grays. If you know much about the UFO phenomenon, you know that there's kind of two types of these gray aliens. There's the small ones that have, I think, 3 fingers and are kind of the minion set that do all the dirty work, carry things around, and seem to be the programmable automatons of the big ones, the tall grays, who are kind of the leaders and the administrators of this alien civilization. Anyway, this was a very tall, like 6-7 foot entity who was almost immaterial, but had this raiment of light, blue and red light, almost like a regal garment. That's what made me think that this was some kind of an emperor figure. And this figure looked at me, didn't speak, but told me telepathically, "You've been given a great gift. Use it wisely." And disappeared. And then I started to experience one of my past lives. I was a chief or shaman of a tribe in way back when. It was the middle of the night, and I was on watch up on the hill overlooking where my tribe had camped for the night. And we'd eaten well. Everybody was well fed. I was really happy. We'd had a good hunt, brought down a big deer. And it was one of those, it's good to beat a king moments for me, reflecting on the tribe that looked to me for leadership, and I'd done a really good job that day bringing down this deer that they'd all fed on. And then all of a sudden I had this incredible sadness come over me. And that was the realization that, hey, I killed a deer today. I killed this other creature. It was so beautiful, so majestic, big antlers, and like this was like the king of the deer, if you will. And I had this immense sadness come over me that I'd killed this beautiful beast without a thought to feed my family and myself. And I was literally crying in remorse for this killing. And then the soul of this deer came to me and said, "Tom, you don't need to be sad for me. I gave my life for your people willingly. And all I ask in return is that you pray for my soul. You pray that I'll be given a chance at a better life, which I know I'm going to have. I'm on to something better than what you took me from. So don't feel sad. Just appreciate, when you take a life, appreciate what you're ending and what you're beginning." Very profound moment. And then this moment ended. And what happened next was, I don't know. I describe it as a fast forward, backward overview of all the lives I'd ever had. creature after creature after creature, world after world after world that I experienced being in. And the only one I can remember clearly was existence as this translucent jellyfish octopus thing, bright yellow thing, but with this deep consciousness. And that was only one that I connected with for longer than a brief second. Otherwise, it was just weird form after weird form after weird, literally thousands of incarnations that flashed before me. And then that ended, and I became aware of what was going on in the room again. And at this point, they were looking for a few people to come up and do some focus work on with the shaman. And, saying, picking certain people. And I felt that I needed to be one of those people that is going to be part of this special part of the ceremony. And so I kind of pushed my way into this. It was really weird, I'm sure, for the people. And during this time, I started hearing these people administering the ayahuasca making comments like, "What's he doing here?" And like there was something really weird going on in this ceremony that they couldn't figure out. At any rate, I took this extra dose, sat in one of these special chairs, and got a little extra dose of, the magic of the shaman, spreading some stuff and chanting and doing some special stuff around each person. And then, kind of just participated in the rest of the night, where there were musicians that liked to go to these things, and they would just kind of jam and make music. And me being a musical person, I sort of just danced to it and participated in it. And I could feel energy flowing from my hands and my feet, becoming involved in this experiment, in this musical experience, and not making music myself, not really uttering anything, chanting or anything, but this energy was feeding into this experience. And these musicians were really getting into what they were doing. It's like, wow, this is the best it's ever been. And it was kind of a strange experience for everybody. The next morning, everybody kind of woke up, at some point fell asleep, and everybody woke up and started processing what had happened that night. And I guess me more than most, I didn't really talk to anybody much about what was going on. They did say, if you want to talk to the shaman about this experience, you can keep it kind of quiet. Really not good to share what you've learned. Share what you feel you can share with the shaman. And parts of this I didn't feel comfortable sharing with the shaman, but I did talk to him and said, I'd had this really weird experience. Can you help me process it? And frankly, the shaman was like, I can't help you with that. Basically, you're on your own with this one, because I've never seen anyone this kind of a mystical experience before. So I went about the day. It was a 2-night ceremony, so the day was pretty much free to wander around and talk to people and process what we'd learned and find maybe a focus for the second night. As I was walking around, it was a really neat estate in Connecticut. It's like maybe somebody had a big piece of land. They still lived in the main house, but they sort of created this convention center arrangement of the rest of the place. They had like some tents and some cabins and meeting places, and I think that's how they used this space. They were renting it out to this outfit that did these ayahuasca ceremonies. I started wandering around this place, and as I told you, my dad used to always take us in the woods, so I was very much a person who had spent a lot of time wandering in the woods. And I thought, well, I'll wander around and see if I get any inspiration for a second night after what was, it's like, I don't know what else I could learn after this first night, because it's so blown my mind that I don't know where this is going. I started wandering around, and I can't remember which of the two big experiences of that wandering happened first, but I'll tell you, one of them, two things of that day that happened was I was wandering and I found this big meadow, and there was a little songbird, not a species I would directly recognize. It was interesting colored, maybe a little bit like a robin, but kind of orangish breast. And it was sitting in the middle of this clearing. And I thought, that's an interesting bird. Maybe it holds a clue for me. So I walked up to this bird and literally walked up to it, standing right from here to here as far as the microphone is away from me, communing with this little bird. He just, they're looking at me. And weird. I had this communion with this bird, and it communicated to me that it was really proud of what I was going to be doing for their species, for the bird people. And was just so happy that they'd been selected to meet me on this day. And sort of gave me this feeling that we're all for you. We're all for you, Rob. You got the support of the bird kingdom. After a while communing with this bird, mind you, the bird didn't move. It didn't fly away. It moved, definitely. It wasn't a dead bird. Not the dead parrot sketch by any stretch of the imagination. Eventually, we kind of got to the point where we didn't have anything else to share, and I got up and I walked on. And I came to something very interesting next. I came to this big fallen tree that was rotting and decaying. You could barely tell that it had been a tree, except for there was this long, decaying corpse of a tree there. And interestingly, this tree had been surrounded by stones. A ring of stones around this dead tree. And I thought, that's odd. That could only have been put there by the tribe that lived here at one time, who were commemorating this tree. And I don't know what kind of a tree, but I think it must have been an oak tree, maybe, because that's a special spiritual tree. And I communed with this tree, and it told me a little story about the people that it had protected and looked over and was kind of their totem, their spirit creature. And he'd lived among this tribe, being kind of a focus for their worship for a long time. This was obviously a very old tree when it died. I couldn't count the rings because there wasn't enough left to count it, but this was a massive tree for an oak. Easily 300 or 400 years old, and God knows how long since decaying. At any rate, this tree sort of gave me a sense of the plant kingdom being a part of my journey. wanting to tell their story of how they had worked with our species to take us to where we were, to take us to this event, this moment that we're in the middle of. The second night was kind of different. It's almost like, I mean, the first night I was in this energetic mode, and the musicians were relating to it, but the people putting on the ayahuasca ceremony, the shaman and the helpers who were also partaking in the experiment, even though they were organizing it, so that they could kind of be part of the energy of the whole thing. It had really discombobulated them, whatever seemed to be going on that night. They were just like talking in whispers about what's going on here. Blah, 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 blah. And the second night, I went in with these two encounters of the plant and animal kingdom, and with an idea that, gosh, I've been given some sort of special mission here. I don't quite fully understand it yet, but it's like I seem to be a Dr. Dolittle who can talk to the animals and the plants now, and I have this sense of having something special to do that I'm discovering, some special message to give. The second night, it was almost like I was the shaman and harmonizing with the other people going around and getting a sense of how to be the shaman of a ceremony. And since that time, there have been numerous times where I felt like I was part of a ceremony which was being conducted at a distance. And I could feel the energy of people in groups like this reaching out and wanting to touch a higher guidance, a source of more energy to drive their spiritual awakening. I feel it right now in my hands as I'm talking to you. I feel this energy flowing. And it's a weird feeling. It comes on me at the oddest times. And I've kind of decided it's not something I can control. This energy that I have is not here for me to use and manipulate and control things. That's not what I'm here for. I'm not one of these faith healers. I know that's not my mission. I thought about it for a while. Am I supposed to be a shaman? Am I supposed to go out and start healing people? No, that's not what my role is. Because when I got back from this, I started realizing that I had this gift of truth. I'd watched something on YouTube and, about, there's a group of people that think that they've found biblical truth. And they're finding connections in the Bible that make it more real. Oh, I've got to take my herbal dose right now. Let me just step aside. Okay. I'm going to pause and make this so I'm going to stop this session right now. I know I've kind of left you in the lurch, but I need to go get my herbal fix, and we're at an hour and 44, so there's going to be a part 3. Wait for it.